This is Piero della Francesca's portrait of his patron, a man called Federico de Montefeltro, together with his wife, Battista, Sforza. And for me, it's one of the most fantastic portraits of the small town Renaissance ruler. He's not one of the real heavyweights, but he's a powerful man. This is his wife. He's had himself painted with her just after her death. That's why she has been given this slight pallor. She has this slightly otherworldly air about her. And the pictures are by Piero della Francesca, who's one of the greatest of all Renaissance artists. Has this ability to freeze time, to make a scene that seems as though it will last forever. You can still go to the top of Federico's palace in the wonderful town of Urbino. That was his town, that was the place that he ruled. And you can still see that view. It's symbolic that he should have been painted as if at the top of his palace, looking out across the domain that he has, so to speak, controlled and contained. Who was this man in his pillar box red hat? Well, he was one of the great characters of the Renaissance. He was a mercenary soldier. The early Renaissance was a period of more or less constant war between the patchwork of states that formed an Italy that definitely was not a unified country. And he had his own private army, which he would rent out for hire to anybody who was fighting a war against anybody else. But unlike the bully boy mercenaries of the past, Federico was also a learned man. He'd received a humanist education. He had read the political writings of people such as Cicero. He was familiar with Roman military strategy, and he became famous for his ability to manipulate people with words and with arguments and with ideas and with stratagems, not just through the power of his soldiers. Sometimes he would merely threaten to join one prince rather than another and be paid so much money that he could afford just to take his army home with no one being injured. So he was this sort of genius of the Renaissance. He was a great patron of science and mathematics. He commissioned Piero della Francesca, the man who painted this picture, to create the first full-blown treatise on the science of perspective, for example. And he had what was regarded generally as the greatest private library of the mid-15th century. One of the peculiarities of Federico as a book collector was that he hated printed books. Which I think is rather wonderful. He thought they were vulgar because, after all, anybody could have a book that was printed, and he wanted to have the only copy of the books that he collected. So if you wanted to read one of the books that were in his library, you had to travel to Urbino and ask him for his permission. Now, why did the artist paint Federico on the right, looking at his wife, Battista, and she's on the left? The left is the position of power. Normally, in a Renaissance power portrait, it would always be the prince on the left, looking at his wife on the right, as we look at it. But it's the other way around. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because when Federico was young, he was involved in a joust. He was a very romantic young man, and he was in love with this woman, and he said he would joust for her honor. So he engaged in this tournament, and during the course of the tournament, a terrible accident happened, and the lance went straight into his eye, and it took out his right eye completely. So he was always painted in profile. He was never painted front on. This also suited his ideas about himself. Drawn from his own humanist education. He's a ruler, but he thinks of himself as a Caesar, someone who has the grandeur of the Romans of the ancient world. And how did the Romans have themselves depicted? On their coins, in profile. So there's a kind of point about having himself painted in profile, but it's also done out of necessity because he has no eye. Now, if you look at this, we're getting a little bit arcane here, but I can't stop myself because I love this image so much. I am going to go on about it. Look at the little piece missing from the bridge of his nose. Now, some people think that was part of the same damage that was done by the lance, but I don't. And I'll tell you why I don't. I've got a friend, a good friend, who's a brilliant art historian called David Exsurgeon, written a fantastic book about Renaissance altarpieces. And David happens to be blind in one eye. And David said, well, the great problem, if you're blind in one eye, the thing that really gets in your way is the bridge of your nose, because it blocks the sight from your one eye. So you're liable to bump into people on the side of your bad eye because you've got this bridge of the nose that's stopping you from seeing people coming down the street that way. And that's what happens a lot during rush hour to me. So David said that he thinks, given that Federico was so keen on perspective and angles of vision and worked with Piero della Francesca, the greatest master of perspective in mid-15th century Renaissance Italy, maybe Federico worked out that if he got the court surgeon to cut away the bridge of his nose, his vision would be that much better. So that's why whether it's true or not, thank you, David, for the theory. And I think it's just wonderful. So there you have it. The one-eyed mercenary in the pillar box red hat with his beautiful wife, sadly passed away, Battista Sforza, forever perched above this beautiful Umbrian Tuscan landscape. Wonderful picture. It's in the Uffizi. Go and see it if you can.